Welcome to another Good Dads podcast. I am Jay Fotsch alongside Dr. Jennifer Baker, and our ghost today is Paul Windisch. Not the real Paul Windisch, but the ghost of Paul Windisch. Let's rub the genie. This is our genie. This is what you do. Okay. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know.
Okay,
that.
you got to rub that three times.
I don't remember seeing that in the previous.
Well, no, it's a new tradition we're starting.
Okay.
You got to rub it for the ghost to come out.
I'm good.
Okay. Welcome, Paul Windisch. And real quick, we want to talk a little bit about having you, Dr. Baker, on with Good Dads, Great Communities.
Well, the reason we have Paul here is because he was with us from the beginning. As you know, this is our 10th year. And although this doesn't have quite the charm of our old studio.
This is great. This is fantastic.
He was here for many years in the early days when nobody knew it was going to be like it is today. And had, could catch the vision for what we were doing, which is pretty impressive.
Let me just ask you before we even talk about you being a dad, how does that feel to be like on the start of an organization and then come in here and go, wow. I mean, that's kind of what you envision, right? When you start something, and I know we talk to Dr. Baker about it all the time, but somebody who was on the OG Good Dads, and you come in here and you're like, wow, this has evolved.
I honestly, I knew that Dr. Baker had the vision you're talking about. And I think it was actually back in 2014 when you got there was a group of business leaders that we would have lunch all together once a month. And one of them was Gary Whitaker from 417 Magazine. And he and Dr. Baker had been talking, and he said, hey, I'm going to invite Dr. Baker into this meeting, and we're going to talk about an idea that she has. And it was the first discussion about Good Dads. And so I got to be a part of the design of the logo. We decided on the logo. We decided on the name. I mean, it was amazing, but I could not have envisioned 10 years down the road it doing what it's doing.
Oh, me either.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we from the very beginning when we started doing the lunches and things like that, it was at that point we thought, wow, we're making some real progress.
Yeah.
But that was just the beginning, the tip of the iceberg.
Well, that kind of gets us into our topic today and connecting your identity in the community with your goals. But first, Paul Windisch, tell us a little bit about your family and being a dad.
I am a dad of one son, Hayden. He's a 15-year-old freshman at Nixa. You're looking at me like, I'm an old dad, and I am. Not as old as you.
It's okay. I'm an old dad.
My wife and I got together when I was in my mid-30s. She was in her early 30s. And, so God blessed us with one child. And, he is a huge part of my life, a fantastic part of my life. But he's a 15-year-old, so we definitely battle, and you'll get to that. You will. But I'm married to.
Can't wait.
I'm married to my beautiful wife, Christy, and she is a school teacher in Nixa. I've worked in the media industry for almost 30 years now, and I've been in Springfield for that long. I grew up in St. Louis.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for being on. We appreciate it today. And do you want to go ahead and start, Dr. Baker?
Sure.
I know you've known Paul for a long time.
Yeah.
I have too. Me and him used to go Table Rock Lake. We used to cruise the lake. He'd pick me up in his wakeboard. He had board shorts.
Ah,
yeah,
you still do.
Heck yeah! Oh man, I'm way past board shorts. My belly just does not allow for board shorts anymore. So God love you for still getting in those, man.
I'm not saying it looks good, but I still wear them.
Well, back then I was thinking about fatherhood and how important it was, and I was thinking if we could only do one thing for a family, if we could get dad involved, it could make all the difference for the family. So I could see there are a lot of things for moms and kids, but there was nothing for dads. And I believe the discussion we initially started with was all you businesses have dollars that you use for marketing. how about including a positive message about being a dad with your marketing dollars? And so Gary Whitaker was very helpful with that. And then Rick's Automotive, Rick Hewlett, jumped right on that idea. And you being in marketing, I think that's why he invited you to be in the room. So
yeah, for sure. I remember that first discussion because you had been to many conferences, many seminars, whatever it was, and nobody talked about dads in the community. It was all about moms or teens or families, but nobody was focusing on dads. And then when you started sharing the difference it makes when a dad is present versus not present in the family and the statistics of what happens as that child grows up is eye-opening, staggering.
Yeah.
And so I was on board. At the time, I had, Hayden was 4 years old, and I wanted to be that good dad. I didn't want to screw up. I mean, we all screw up, but it's like, I think sometimes we live inside our own little circles, and we only really think about the things that affect us. But that just, to me, that opened my eyes to what really happens. And so I was more than happy to be a part of that.
Yeah. And, I was thinking about it initially as I don't want to ask these folks for money. I want them to do what they are already going to do. They're going to spend marketing dollars. But how about including a positive message with dads? And I think we actually even looked at some ads, like here's how there was a gum commercial where the dad was making little origami swans for his daughter. And then there was a peanut butter Cheerios commercial that was just really great. And we looked at, and there were a few others, and we looked at those. And I think that was intriguing. And then, some of those people in the room, like Rick, grew up without a dad. And I think that but he is a really good dad to his adult children and grandfather. And I think that was a really compelling message to them.
For sure.
Yeah. And that's interesting too, is getting a bunch of people together that have different backgrounds or have been affected differently personally. But I think the biggest thing is just, really believing and having that connection in a group of people that started the foundation of Good Dads, or this episode, Old Dads. Specifically.
Well, I think a lot of people start out thinking, well, what about those poor dads, who are not good dads? Yeah. And that was not where we wanted to start. We actually didn't start serving at-risk dads until 2018.
Wow.
Yeah. That's where when we offered our first class was in June of 2018.
Okay.
So there were 3 years there. We were just focusing on all dads. And you remember the dad-to-dad networking lunches.
Yeah.
And we were just focusing on, hey, let's make a great place for dads to connect, talk about being a dad, maybe give them we had a speaker every time. By the way, we're doing that again on May 7th at Nissan Kia.
Oh, great.
They're hosting a lunch, so I hope you both will be there.
Sure.
Anyway, we did 50 of those lunches. Can you believe that? We did 50 of those lunches around different themes, like how to help your child succeed and all of those things.
Well, and I think you're exactly right. Initially, when people think about somebody not being a good dad, they think only incarcerated, divorced, deadbeat, doesn't show up for anything. But it does apply to all dads, because there is the workaholic dad who's maybe home in the evenings, but not necessarily present. There's so many circumstances, and it doesn't matter what your status in life is. And so that was your vision, Dr. Baker, that let's find those, it's all for all dads. Let's appeal to all dads in ways that they can connect and teach them how to connect with their children. Because that was the other thing. A lot of dads didn't know how to connect with their children.
Yeah. And I could see that from my work as a psychologist. I could see that there were dads who were struggling with that. So that was another motivating factor. But I think, since we're talking about great communities, if we're thinking about other communities, I would say traditionally around the United States, most people start with dads who are struggling, at-risk dads, but that never spreads to the whole community. That is not something that people will embrace. And we did not start there. We started with businesses and trying to connect with their own felt need or their own interest. I think you got to know the statistics, but then you got to also know, you got to make it personal and realize where a lot of business owners are dads and they employ dads. Mm-hmm. And that's where you have to sort of like, what's the opportunity in my community?
Yeah.
And it's these small things too. And I always like to put out this reminder in our podcasts, is because when I first, heard about Good Dads and you were telling me about it, I'm just like, well, this is kind of a braggadocious club. It's just like, well, I guess I'm not good enough to be in Good Dads. But kind of what you're saying is, even for me, before I started these podcasts and I was not a dad, just to hear some of the little things. And I think the little things that I've picked up on these podcasts are probably the biggest things. And it's something that you just said that kind of sparked something. And that is, as we get caught up in our everyday lives, I think that's kind of also the vision of Good Dads as well, is just to stop, pause, because our kids are always watching. That's something that I've learned from you on these podcasts. So if you are teaching them about good relationships and you're in a bad one, if you're teaching them about tempers and you have one, if you're teaching them about work ethic and you're not good at that, they're watching. So I think it's not anything about being perfect. That's not what we do this for either. Right. I think it's just a pause so we have somebody to talk to and go, hey, don't forget, a little person is watching you.
Right.
And just to make sure that we keep ourselves in check. And those are the things that go a long way. And I know that sometimes it's like, well, yeah, duh. But, well, yeah, duh. That's where we have to pause and just really just go, hey, I don't need to do this paper tonight for work.
You're exactly right.
My kid just asked me a question. That's probably the most important part of my day.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if my kids, especially a teenager, he might not ask you a question for another 3 years.
I know.
If he asks you a question tonight, you better be ready, Paul.
This Good Dads podcast is brought to you in part by our generous supporters. This week, we'd like to thank the following: Prime Inc., ESC Consulting, Dr. and Mrs. Benji and Lori Lambert, Basis Financial Group, Branson Public Schools. Thank you to all of our sponsors. Visit our website at gooddads.com to learn how to contribute to the Good Dads mission.
I'm curious about, what I think you were a board member for 7 or 8 years. I don't know, a long time. What kept you hooked in with all the very busy time of life? I think eventually it was your son's sports schedule you said. Yeah. So what kept you hooked in?
I think a lot of the things that Jay was just talking about, because by nature, I've always been kind of a hurried person. I feel like I have to hurry through things, and I feel like I'm busy, and it's easy for me to get distracted from the important things. Right. And so every time I would come to a board meeting, or every time I'd come to a lunch or some type of a function, I was talking with dads and I was learning things. I was learning how I could slow down. It was convicting, honestly. It was very convicting, because I can't tell you how many evenings where I know that I was maybe doing something with my son or in the same room, but I wasn't present, right? And so it was very inspiring to see when that light bulb went off. Oh my gosh, I do need to do things differently. And then the other part of it was just watching the organization grow, because in the beginning, when we were doing very, very small events, and we were thrilled if we raised a couple $100, right? To watching that just evolve and seeing what you're doing. And after I got off the board, and then I think a couple of years later, I came and talked to you. And at that point, I was just like, wow, this is amazing. So when I was involved, I was thoroughly enjoying it. I also felt one of the things that I thought that you've done a great job at is finding board members or people who can help the organization from different walks of the business life that can see things differently. And I think that's one of the things that we're talking about here is if you're going into a community to start a branch or some type of a community organization, it's to really look for a variety of type of people. And with my media and marketing background, I felt like I was able to contribute in ways that helped get the word out about Good Dads more so than if I were a banker.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have a banker.
Right.
But we didn't have a media person. So, yeah, I mean, I look at that now, and that to me is like one of the great joys to have people in trucking and people in finance and people, retired nurse, and just because they bring such a broad viewpoint, perspective, and you need that because there are all kinds of dads. You having a better understanding, like not everybody works 8 to 5, you know?
Yeah. And another example, you had, a business owner on the board that owned a construction company. He's able to relate to people in much different ways than I could, right? So I just think that you're able to use the strengths of all those people. You're right, the finance people, I could never handle that part of it and never offer advice on that part of it. But if we want to talk about getting the exposure to more people, then I can talk about that.
Yeah.
Well, and also the experiences, not just necessarily the different careers. And we kind of hit upon that just a little bit, but the experiences of, maybe a dad in the organization that didn't have a father figure and he's trying to break the cycle.
Yeah.
Or he had a different or he deals with different dads with different backgrounds that maybe didn't have a father figure.
Yeah.
So you have all of these different viewpoints and life experiences that you can also bring to the organization to help better everyone.
Well, and I'm just going to say, the broader the kinds of people that you have, I really am a big believer now in the whole 6 degrees of separation. How many people, when Paul Williams, who's our chief of police, came in and he said, "Oh, I brought in my yearbook because you were a first-year teacher at my high school in Detroit."
Oh my gosh.
So here we are in Springfield, Missouri. I lived in that area for 3.5 years, taught at that school 1 year. And he was I think he might have been a freshman or a sophomore when I was teaching, and I had mostly juniors and seniors. Isn't that interesting?
Wow.
Yeah. And so, people who know people who like, oh, well. So I think that people, if they want to do something for fathers in their community, they need to not be thinking just about, well, that poor father over there. They want to be thinking about, well, who do I know? Where could I start?
Yeah.
And maybe if they're an educator or they're very involved in their child's school, they could say, well, what about the dads in my kid's school? Let's start with the dads we know and then see who they know. And that's really kind of what we did.
Yeah.
I mean.
And I think there was also a huge benefit that because of the events and the lunches, that the board members communicated and interacted more. I've been on boards in the past where I barely knew these other board members. I only saw them once a month or once every other month when we had a board meeting. And there was no connection there. Yeah. So you didn't feel like you were necessarily a part of the organization or you were contributing. But I felt, there's still friendships that I have that I still communicate with several of the guys that were on the board with.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have had that if we didn't do those things and you didn't connect us in ways. And yes, we were all connected by being dads, but at the same time, if we didn't all get together and do some of these events and some of these lunches, I don't think we would have had the success early on that we did.
No, I think that's a really good point, is that if you're going to change the world, which is like what I like to think we're doing, you have to know each other. You have to trust each other. You have to feel like you can depend on each other to show up when it's necessary. So, it's not, people will say to us when we start a chapter in a new community, well, how often do we have to get together? At least once a month, but ideally the best boards will be people who have some connection, find connection, and they get together a little more often than that in what they're doing.
Could that be maybe something that we were talking about where you're running yourself thin and being on too many boards?
Yeah.
To where you're worried about that you can't meet once a month, where you're like, well, because I'm involved in 4 different things. And maybe that's also kind of like, oh, okay, maybe I only need to concentrate on one or two things.
I am undoubtedly biased, but I would say, how many of the boards are you on? Are they about downstream efforts? The kinds of things you do when people go over the cliff and you have to make sure they have enough food and clothing. A lot of people can do that.
Right.
But to do upstream efforts, to do positive preventative type of work, it takes a special group of people to do that. And so maybe you could let go of some of these other things because you have the ability to see how important that upstream effort is.
Yes.
Were you talking directly to Paul when he said?
Sure, I think Paul would be a great board member. He could come back on the board. Yeah.
I always need to let go of some other things.
Yeah.
But I will make a comment on that, is that in the past, when I've been on other boards, it seems like there is this group of people in this community, at least, that get kind of handpicked for boards because they've been on boards. And I don't necessarily think that is the best people to recruit. I think you got to find people. Honestly, I feel like some of the people who are on boards in this community are on boards because they feel obligated instead of encouraged or passionate about it. And so I think having a board of people who are passionate and influential and ready to go out and make changes, that's the best type of board you can have, whether they've had experience or not.
Yeah, exactly.
So the passion, I mean, that kind of goes back to, obviously, you have to really care for whatever board or whatever organization you want to go to, but you have to have that. And I think you're right. I think just having those people skills and the want and the drive to kind of put your best efforts and what can I do for the organization kind of a thing, instead of going through the motions of, yes, I've been a director before. Yes, I've been a manager before. Yes, I've budgeted before. Yes. And you're checking all these boxes. It seems like you're on Indeed trying to check all these boxes for somebody who's like, well, this person's never done it before. So let's just get somebody who has. We don't want any new ideas.
That's exactly right.
And I think that was like kind of, and sometimes it is a leap of faith, but I think that's kind of what has drove the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would just say two things. They kind of need to be the Paul Revere to their own friends. In other words, they have to be willing to talk to people they know about what we're doing.
Yep.
And if they're not that personality, then they're probably not a good fit for something that you're trying to get started that's new.
Yeah.
And then they have to be adaptable, because when you're starting something, I mean, we've had to change courses and we had a pandemic thrown right in the middle of all this. But that was actually a good thing for us, because that's when we did a lot of our own writing of our curriculum, and, that put us on the map there. So, not like how they always done it, but how could we do this? Right. And that can be a little unsettling to people if you've never been down the road and you're not really quite sure where that road's going. Anyway, I don't know. You probably had a feeling of like, I'm not sure where we're going with this some days, but I did.
Yeah, I think you always do. And there are expectations early on. I think sometimes we get so excited about the vision, and then we try and rush it ahead, and we create these unrealistic expectations in a lot of ways. But when we did some of the Good Dad's bowling events at Andy B's, I was always so hopeful that that place, and there was good crowds there, right? But I wanted 3 times that, And so early on, it was a little bit difficult to see, oh my gosh, how long is this going to take? And is this going to make it? You always question it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. There were days when I said to myself, we're never going to make it.
So the main reason we're having you on today is that we are going to update the logo. So since you were, it's kind of
I gave my opinion. I did not design.
I think it's kind of like what Coca-Cola did. They did like New Coke, and then they went back to Coca-Cola.
I don't think we're updating
and it's
evolved,
the logo. Every decade. Like you go through the different decades. You look at the McDonald's logo. It's the same logo, but it's evolved. You know what I mean? So moving into 2025, I don't know if, the dad in the shadow should have like a giant mustache. Or, the child should,
No.
That's not why we have you on here.
That was cut off pretty quick, wasn't it?
We're keeping the logo.
All right.
Yeah.
Yes. So, Paul, once again, as we go back to connecting your identity in the community with your goals, is there anything else that you would like to add to this specific discussion, as not necessarily the past, but where we're at now with Good Dads?
Like I said early on, I think Dr. Baker has done a fantastic job at finding those people who can connect with each other, connect with the community. You mentioned finding people who are going to hang out with their friends and talk to their friends about it. And that was one thing that, as I learned more about the cause and about how important a dad is, it was easy to talk about. Okay. And so I think if you're going into a community and you're, for instance, wanting to start a Good Dads branch, or I don't know how you have that set up now. So chapter. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you. I think, I don't know if there's this magic playbook, but I think you've got to find people who are excited about talking to others about it, who are excited about the vision, which again, it's hard to see the vision sometimes. And I would say all walks of life. Go talk to all walks of life and find people that on paper they may not necessarily look like, okay, this is going to be a great board member or a great supporter, but in reality, it's their passion and their heart that is going to move the needle on all that.
That's very good. That's awesome. Well, we really appreciate you being here, and I know that we're going to modify the logo to Old Dads for this podcast. And if we could we get the tennis balls for Paul's walker? Okay.
Hey, when you first found out your wife was pregnant, did you do the math on how old you would be when he graduated high school?
Yeah. I did. I just want to be around for it.
Right.
I was like, I'm going to be driving slower when I teach this kid how to drive.
Right.
Like, I'm already going to be, we'll get front row seat, front row parking because my handicap. You know what I mean? Like by then, I mean, that'll be the age. But Paul Windisch, thank you so much. We really appreciate you coming. Come on in there.
Good to see you, buddy.
Even though you didn't rub the genie, that's okay. That's all right. But Paul Windisch, thank you so much. Good Dads, great communities. And as always, thank you very much, Dr. Baker.